Breaking news doesn't usually feel like the ground shifting under your feet. But this time, this one hit like a straight-up earthquake, shaking the NFL landscape with a force that nobody was ready for. Overnight, reports surfaced that two of the league's most stable, most respected franchises, the Baltimore Ravens and the New Orleans Saints, have aimed their sights on Shedeur Sanders, the Cleveland Browns' golden rookie quarterback. And we're not talking about whispers or harmless chatter. We're talking about concrete offers, dollar amounts so massive you'd think someone pulled them from a video game. The number that set the football world on fire was $275 million. That's not an exaggeration. That's the jaw-dropping, precedent-shattering figure insiders say both New Orleans and Baltimore have thrown at Sanders in a desperate attempt to pry him away from Cleveland before the Browns can even take a victory lap for drafting him. And fans, reporters, analysts, everyone broke instantly into chaos. Think about the nightmare this represents for Cleveland. For the first time in decades, after endless quarterback musical chairs, the Browns believed they had found their savior. The billboards, the marketing campaigns, the season ticket pushes, all built on Shedeur's back. He wasn't just a young QB with potential, he was a symbol, a fresh start, a reason for fans who've endured years of heartbreak to believe again. And now, barely a year into his tenure, that hope is wobbling under the weight of record-setting financial temptations from two franchises known for one thing Cleveland has never mastered: stability. Let's start with Baltimore. When news broke that the Ravens put an eye-popping package on the table, even veteran NFL insiders dropped their jaws. 6 years, $275 million, $180 million guaranteed at signing, and performance incentives so earth-shattering they could balloon the deal to over $325 million if Sanders delivered playoff wins and championship appearances. But money was just the start. Baltimore's pitch was bold, maybe even revolutionary. They reportedly proposed a dual quarterback system, Lamar Jackson and Shedeur Sanders running the field together, blending Lamar's electrifying rushing ability with Sanders' passing talent. Picture defensive coordinators tearing up their game plans on Monday morning, wondering how you prepare for that combo. The Ravens positioned it as futuristic football, a dynasty blueprint. And for Sanders, it offered something Cleveland couldn't: a championship culture, proven coaching, and organizational stability that doesn't crumble with every press conference misstep. As if that wasn't enough, New Orleans decided to raise the stakes. If Baltimore's pitch was radical, the Saints' pitch was visceral. Their offer not only matched the $275 million headline, it added a staggering $200 million guaranteed. That percentage of guaranteed money outpaces nearly every top quarterback deal ever signed in league history. And unlike Cleveland's murky quarterback competition drama, the Saints placed Sanders on a throne from day one. No competing veterans, no locker room mess, just a clear path to being the guy. Add in the culture of New Orleans, a football-mad city still emotionally starved after Drew Brees' retirement, and the emotional pitch was clear. They weren't just buying Sanders the quarterback, they were crowning Sanders the savior. For the Browns, these offers are more than financial headaches. They're existential threats. Jimmy Haslam, Kevin Stefanski, Andrew Berry, names now synonymous with a frenzy of late-night emergency meetings, reportedly fell into panic mode the second these leaks surfaced. Angry, terrified, scrambling for immediate solutions. Ownership allegedly told their staff, no budget restrictions, no half measures. Do whatever it takes to keep this kid in Ohio. Because without Sanders, the Browns aren't just losing a quarterback. They're losing their identity, their credibility, their fan base's fragile hope. And make no mistake, fans feel this in their bones. Social media erupted like wildfire. Hashtags like Keep Shedeur and Pay Your King shot up to national trending lists. Outside the Browns facility, supporters gathered with handmade signs begging ownership to lock him down. On radio stations, the phone lines melted with fury. "We've waited decades for this. Don't you dare blow it now." The energy isn't calm. It's desperate. Because if the Browns let Shedeur slip away, it's not just another L for Cleveland sports. It's the final confirmation of a curse fans already fear is permanent. Meanwhile, the national media circus wasted no time sharpening their knives. Talking heads like Skip Bayless and Stephen A. Smith are already torching Cleveland for malpractice, openly predicting that Sanders' departure will turn the Browns into the laughingstock of the league yet again. Other analysts are digging into the league-wide implications. If a rookie like Shedeur can command $275 million and force teams into panic bidding wars, the quarterback market has officially mutated into something new. It's no longer about waiting for a rookie to prove himself. It's about securing branding, hype, and potential before another team makes you look like yesterday's fool. So here we are, at the edge of something massive. The face of a franchise, staring at two golden doors leading out of Cleveland. One path takes him to Baltimore, where innovative schemes and championship culture await. The other, to New Orleans, where he would inherit the role of undisputed leader and carry an entire city's hopes. And behind him, a Cleveland franchise sweating, stumbling, and praying history won't repeat itself again. Because for Shedeur, this isn't just about a contract. It's about choosing between dysfunction and destiny. And for the Browns, this is their nightmare, their reckoning, their last chance to prove they can actually hold on to greatness when it lands in their lap. The earthquake has struck, the aftershocks are coming, and football may never look the same again. In the NFL, contracts are more than ink and numbers. They're symbols. They tell you who a franchise values, what risks they're willing to take, and what kind of future they believe in. And the offers coming out of Baltimore and New Orleans for Shedeur Sanders didn't just raise eyebrows. They broke the scale. Because when news leaked that both teams had tabled packages worth a staggering $275 million, the football world quickly realized this wasn't just another quarterback story. This was history in the making. Let's start with the raw figures. The Ravens' offer reportedly ran 6 years at $275 million, with $180 million guaranteed at signing. For context, most established superstar quarterbacks don't even get this kind of guarantee until they've posted MVP seasons and playoff runs. We're talking about a rookie who hasn't even closed out his first contract cycle yet. And already, he's being offered the kind of financial security that changes markets forever. Incentive structures tied to Super Bowl appearances and statistical milestones had the potential to balloon the total toward $325 million, averaging numbers more commonly seen in baseball mega deals than NFL rookie extensions. But then came the Saints, who decided if the Ravens were pushing boundaries, they'd shatter them completely. Their pitch included the $275 million base, but accelerated the guaranteed money to $200 million. That's $200 million, locked in no matter what. The most guaranteed money ever tied to a quarterback at this career stage. On paper, it's the kind of proposal designed to leave Cleveland gasping. Incentive triggers gave Shedeur the runway to hit $350 million total value, creating a new stratosphere for quarterback pay. Industry experts called it a paradigm shift, while privately admitting it might be borderline reckless. But reckless or not, it had Shedeur at the center. The numbers are jaw-dropping, but the context makes them even louder. NFL rookie extensions have historically moved cautiously. Teams want to see multiple seasons of growth before breaking the bank. Even quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen had to prove themselves on the field before securing record-smashing extensions. But here's Shedeur, barely acclimated to Cleveland, with two rival organizations already treating him like the golden goose. That's not just a player bet. That's a league-shaking signal. Brand, marketability, and potential now command as much value as raw on-field production. And that's part of what made these offers so shocking to Cleveland. 1. The Browns were suddenly staring down a reality they weren't prepared for. Internally, they still believed they had time to develop Sanders on their terms. Let him log his practice reps, work through inconsistencies, and gradually transition into the savior role. What Baltimore and New Orleans did was rip that timeline away. They forced an accelerated decision, one that says Sanders isn't a long-term project. He's the franchise centerpiece right now. None of this happened in a vacuum. The allure isn't just Shedeur's arm strength or potential. It's his full package, legacy, name power, and jersey sales that have already landed him in the league's upper tier of marketability. Baltimore and New Orleans saw what Cleveland either underestimated or mishandled, that Sanders is bigger than a quarterback. He's a brand, a unifier, and a lightning rod of attention in an NFL obsessed with ticket sales, broadcast ratings, and merchandise revenue. That branding value is almost as important as how many touchdowns he throws. It's no coincidence both teams structured their deals around more than football. Baltimore's pitch wasn't just about money, it was about dynasty building. By pairing Shedeur with Lamar Jackson, they were essentially offering him a safety net. No immediate pressure to carry a franchise solo, but a role in rewriting offensive football. New Orleans, in contrast, swung emotionally. Their contract sweetened by cultural and symbolic weight. Sanders as the heir to Drew Brees' throne, the instant leader of a community hungry for a hero. One blueprint promised innovation, the other promised legacy. And both promised more stability than Cleveland could confidently put on the table. That's why analysts weren't just talking dollars. They talked about precedent. Because if Sanders accepts an offer in this range, it becomes the blueprint for every agent negotiating the next young quarterback contract. Suddenly, teams can't just lowball rookies under the guise of proving themselves. They'll have Shedeur's deal as a benchmark. $275 million for potential plus marketability. Pay up. For Cleveland, the shock wasn't just that other teams wanted him. It was that those teams were willing to go all in this soon. It exposed a brutal truth in plain daylight. While the Browns hesitated, debated, and tinkered with depth charts, others saw the opportunity to swoop in and promise Sanders everything he wanted: money, stability, and status in one package. And that's how a contract negotiation suddenly became a nuclear war. The Ravens flexed their tactical imagination. The Saints flexed their financial desperation. And the Browns? They were caught flat-footed, left scrambling to figure out how to fight battles on two fronts at once. So as the dust settled from the headline drop, one thing became crystal clear. These weren't ordinary offers. These were ultimatums. And if Cleveland thought they had time, Baltimore and New Orleans just proved the clock was already ticking. When the Ravens' plan first leaked, it sounded like something out of Madden or a football fan's fever dream. 2 quarterbacks, 1 offense. A revolutionary system where Lamar Jackson and Shedeur Sanders wouldn't be competitors. They'd be partners in chaos. To most fans, the idea sounded too wild to be real. But insiders swore it wasn't fantasy. It was Baltimore's calculated gamble to stay ahead of the NFL curve while simultaneously putting Cleveland flat on its back. The Ravens aren't new to this. If any franchise prides itself on innovation, it's Baltimore. They've turned league assumptions into afterthoughts before, building entire schemes around Lamar Jackson when analysts claimed his playstyle couldn't work, adapting their roster to amplify his strengths while everyone else tried to force quarterbacks into cookie-cutter molds. That willingness to evolve is exactly why their pitch to Shedeur landed like a thunderclap. A promise not to squeeze him into Cleveland's rigid system, but to create a brand new blueprint tailored for him. At the heart of Baltimore's strategy is a simple but devastating idea. What if defenses never knew which quarterback was about to attack? Picture Lamar motioning into the backfield, defenses loading up for a run, and suddenly the ball whips downfield from Shedeur's arm to a streaking receiver. Or imagine Shedeur lined up to throw while Lamar drifts into a slot roll, forcing defenses to account for his speed like a running back hiding in plain sight. Coordinators already lose sleep game planning for Lamar's one-of-a-kind rushing ability. Add Sanders' passing precision to that equation, and Sunday preparations suddenly look less like strategy and more like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. From a tactical perspective, it's genius. For years, the league has flirted with dual quarterback sets, but no franchise committed to the idea fully. Baltimore's pitch put them forward as pioneers, a two-headed offense capable of keeping defenses guessing every snap. And who better to debut it with than Lamar Jackson, the former MVP built to break defenses, and Shedeur Sanders, the starlet whose arm talent could stretch the field vertically at will. For Baltimore, this wasn't desperation. It was evolution. But the revolution wasn't just about X's and O's. Baltimore's pitch emphasized something Cleveland could never offer: stability. Shedeur wouldn't just be thrown into the fire. He wouldn't be asked to save a franchise overnight. Instead, he'd be nurtured alongside Lamar, easing into leadership while learning the NFL under one of the most respected coaching staffs in football. John Harbaugh's reputation as a developer of quarterbacks and a steady hand in the locker room gave Baltimore credibility their rivals envied. In a league where franchises crumble under instability, the Ravens painted themselves as the rock Sanders could build his future on. And then came the money. 6 years, $275 million. A contract so front-loaded with guarantees, it almost dared Cleveland to match it. But Baltimore's brilliance wasn't just in the amount, it was in the framing. They didn't sell Sanders on money alone. They layered financial security with the dream of immediate contention. Their message was clear: sign with us and you don't just get paid. You chase rings. You cement legacy. You redefine football history. Reports suggest the Ravens were meticulous in their approach, detailing their championship pedigree in meetings. They highlighted playoff appearances, their Super Bowl track record, their culture of organizational trust. They reminded Sanders that Baltimore's problems rarely stemmed from dysfunction. Unlike Cleveland, where coaching carousel after coaching carousel had left stars stranded and fans bitter. For a player already frustrated with whispers of Cleveland's instability, it was as if Baltimore had read directly from his private playbook of concerns. And make no mistake, Baltimore understood leverage. They saw Cleveland's hesitation with early extensions, the confusing handling of their depth charts, the half-hearted QB competitions that didn't exactly scream confidence. They exploited that vulnerability with precision. Where Cleveland delayed, Baltimore attacked. Where Cleveland improvised, Baltimore strategized months in advance. The Ravens weren't just pitching money, they were pitching certainty. That's why media analysts dubbed Baltimore's move the evolution pitch. It wasn't just about signing Sanders to a big deal, it was about selling him the future of football itself. A dual QB system to terrify the AFC North. A smooth passing of the torch when Lamar, inevitably, reached the back half of his career. And in the meantime, a franchise already notorious for toughness, innovation, and winning seasons would let Sanders grow without fear of being chewed up by organizational dysfunction. For Cleveland, watching this unfold had to feel like staring at a nightmare in 4K resolution. They weren't just competing with another team's wallet. They were competing with vision, with stability, with an idea of greatness so magnetic it made Cleveland's promises look flimsy by comparison. In the battle for Shedeur Sanders, Baltimore didn't just swing with money. They swung with a revolution. And if Cleveland thought this storm was bad, they hadn't even seen what New Orleans had prepared, because the Saints went all in with something even more audacious. If Baltimore's bid for Shedeur Sanders was about innovation and strategy, the New Orleans Saints pitch came from a completely different place. It wasn't about creating a futuristic offense or pairing two superstars together. It was about salvation, about filling a void that's haunted the franchise since Drew Brees walked off the field for the last time. Ever since Brees retired, the Saints have been trapped in quarterback purgatory. They tried patchwork solutions, stopgap veterans, and maybe he'll work out projects, but none stuck. Each option only reminded the fan base of what they lost when Brees was gone: stability, leadership, and a quarterback who actually fit the culture of New Orleans. By the time news broke that Shedeur Sanders could be torn away from Cleveland, the Saints saw what nobody else could afford to miss: their chance for redemption. So the Saints didn't tiptoe, they didn't whisper. They came in swinging with the boldest offer on the table: $275 million base contract, with $200 million guaranteed at signing. To put that in perspective, that's the highest guarantee percentage in quarterback extension history. It wasn't just aggressive, it was borderline reckless. But for the Saints, it wasn't a gamble, it was survival. And beyond the money, they sweetened the pot with incentives that could push the total value toward $350 million. Think about how wild that number is. $350 million tied to a rookie extension. That's the kind of eye-popping figure that sets the internet ablaze. Not because people think it's realistic, but because it's so outrageous that it redefines the conversation. It told Shedeur in no uncertain terms, "You're not just a quarterback here, you're the franchise." But here's where New Orleans' pitch diverged from Baltimore's. Instead of focusing on tactical innovation, the Saints went for heart. They framed Sanders not as a cog in a system, but as the undisputed new face of the franchise. No quarterback competitions, no established veterans breathing down his neck, no organizational politics muddying the waters. Just a clear throne, polished and waiting, with his name already engraved on it. And in a city like New Orleans, that pitch carried extra weight. The Saints positioned themselves as more than an NFL franchise. They made it about culture, about embracing not just a player, but a savior, someone who could restore faith to one of the league's most passionate communities. Imagine walking into the Superdome with 70,000 fans roaring as you line up behind center, knowing there's no if, you're the guy from day one. That was the Saints' promise. Insiders said their presentation leaned heavily on emotion. They emphasized that New Orleans isn't just a place where quarterbacks play, it's a place where quarterbacks become legends. They talked about Drew Brees' legacy, his connection with the city, how he wasn't just a player, but a symbol for resilience, unity, and belief. And then they told Shedeur, "That could be you next." The brilliance of the Saints' desperation pitch is that it recognized Sanders as more than talent. They saw the brand. They saw the son of Coach Prime, a quarterback with a last name already dripping in football royalty. And they tied that to their own void. They painted a picture where Shedeur wasn't just throwing passes, he was reviving an entire city's spirit. That's the kind of emotional manipulation only desperate franchises can pull off. And it hit like lightning. And of course, for Shedeur, the Saints' culture-based appeal wasn't empty talk. The Superdome is one of the loudest, proudest atmospheres in the NFL. The Saints reinvented home field advantage during their dominant years, especially under Brees and Sean Payton. The Saints didn't just promise big paychecks, they promised immortality. They framed Sanders' arrival as the rebirth of a dynasty. The strategy was clear. Baltimore gave Sanders innovation, but the Saints offered him identity. Baltimore said, "You'll be part of a 2 QB revolution." New Orleans said, "Forget revolution, you're the king here." The stakes were equally clear. For a franchise that's clawed for a quarterback solution since Breeze's retirement, landing Sanders would mean saving face, saving fans, and stabilizing the roster's championship window. And for New Orleans, that urgency came with no shame. Everything about their pitch screamed emotional persuasion. Former players hyped Sanders up as the rightful heir. Local influencers emphasized the cultural love story of Coach Prime's son becoming the Saints' savior. Even regional business and tourism leaders reportedly got involved, dangling a cut of New Orleans' global marketability to sweeten the deal. It was aggressive, it was emotional, and it worked in its own way. Because where Baltimore sold stability and chess-level scheming, the Saints offered Sanders something just as powerful: the chance to become a living legend the second he walked into the building. And for Cleveland, this wasn't just an alternate threat, it was worse. The Ravens' bid was a strategic nightmare. The Saints' bid was an emotional dagger. Because when another franchise promises not just money, but your very identity, how do you compete with that? For Cleveland, the moment those blockbuster offers from Baltimore and New Orleans hit the airwaves, the mood wasn't intrigue or curiosity. It was outright panic. What had started as whispers about tampering interest spiraled overnight into contract figures so staggering that they threatened to rip the Browns' entire future away in one swoop. Inside team headquarters, according to multiple sources, the atmosphere went from business as usual to full-on crisis mode in less than 24 hours. Owner Jimmy Haslam reportedly didn't sleep, pacing his way through emergency meetings where his tone alternated between furious and terrified. Furious that other franchises had the audacity to openly hunt what he considered his franchise's one true savior, and terrified by the creeping suspicion that Cleveland itself had armed them with the ammunition. Because deep down, everyone in Berea knew the uncomfortable truth: instability had already cracked the door open. Baltimore and New Orleans simply barged through it. Reports out of headquarters described an almost surreal scramble. Haslam called in advisors, cap specialists, PR consultants, and even external voices, a mix of desperation and overcompensation. General Manager Andrew Berry allegedly canceled all scheduled personal plans and rushed back to his office. Head coach Kevin Stefanski, already under pressure for odd handling of quarterback rotations earlier in the season, was described as visibly rattled, pacing up and down conference rooms while trying to frame counterarguments that didn't sound hollow. It wasn't just one problem, it was an avalanche. First came the financial math. Cleveland was already cap-heavy thanks to prior commitments, and now they were staring at rival offers guaranteeing over $180 million at signing. To match them, Haslam would need to do something almost unheard of for Cleveland ownership: tear off the pocketbook leash, throw fiscal caution to the wind, and essentially admit that one player's happiness would dictate the entire roster's future. That blank check directive didn't come naturally, but sources suggest by hour 2 of the emergency sessions. The panic had grown so sharp, it was the only card left on the table. Then came the football part. Stefanski had to face reality. For months, his inconsistent approach to Sanders' development, rotating him through watered-down scout team drills, dodging questions in press conferences, downplaying his role, had created resentment. If Sanders truly felt undervalued, Baltimore and New Orleans now had proof of what to highlight in their pitches. So the Browns scrambled, modifying everything overnight. Suddenly, Shedeur was bumped up into expanded practice reps, loaded with heavier game planning inclusion, and pushed into visible leadership positions to show the cameras that Cleveland trusted him. In 1 week, his role flipped from understudy to franchise driver, a transformation less about genuine faith and more about survival optics. But the desperation was obvious. Players noticed, fans noticed, even Sanders likely noticed. It was as if the Browns only remembered his importance when their backs were against the wall. And nothing screams dysfunction like an organization that changes its philosophy only after external pressure exposes it. The locker room, meanwhile, became a silent barometer of the chaos. Veterans questioned why it took Baltimore and New Orleans circling like sharks for Cleveland to treat Sanders as their cornerstone. Younger players whispered about their futures, recognizing that if an emerging star could eye greener pastures due to instability, maybe they should too. The idea of player empowerment suddenly didn't feel abstract. It was playing out in their own building in real time. On top of that, public perception piled on with brutal speed. Fans protested outside team facilities with signs reading, "Pay him now," and "Don't let Shedeur be another mistake." Radio call-in lines melted down with emotional outbursts, ranging from rage at Haslam's perceived cheapness to pure desperation at the thought of watching yet another quarterback slip away. Social media trended with hashtags like Browns Panic and hashtag Save Our QB, amplifying a sense that this wasn't just about Shedeur anymore. It was about every scar Cleveland fans have accumulated over decades of quarterback heartbreak. Internally, Haslam's war room reached a nervous stalemate. Every advisor knew the money alone wouldn't be enough. Baltimore promised stability and innovation. New Orleans promised legacy and immediate leadership. What could Cleveland pitch? More of the same instability Shedeur was already weary of? No, they would need structural reform, coaching accountability, clearer communication, a promise, however hastily crafted, that Sanders' long-term growth wouldn't be sabotaged by the franchise's usual dysfunction. One source described the mood bluntly. It felt like desperation disguised as planning. They weren't building a future, they were trying to patch a hole in a sinking ship. And maybe that's why the panic cut deeper. Because Cleveland, for all its scrambling, had exposed itself more. Instead of projecting calm authority, the franchise confirmed everything rivals had whispered in Sanders' ear. That the Browns only act bold when threatened, only value stars under duress, and only build urgency when on the brink of collapse. The Ravens' offer pushed Cleveland into chaos. The Saints' bid pressed on emotional wounds. But Cleveland's response, the hurried meetings, panicked optics, and overnight flip-flopping, showed that dysfunction wasn't external. It was internal, embedded in the DNA of the organization. And that's why this storm became more than dollars. Because while Baltimore and New Orleans sold Sanders on vision and culture, Cleveland sold him on panic. And nothing makes a player question your commitment quite like realizing you only started fighting for him when everyone else already did. If you really want to measure the gravity of a contract saga, you don't look at the boardrooms or the cap sheets. You look at the fans. And in Cleveland, the fans told the story better than anyone. The moment news broke of the Ravens and Saints' earth-shattering offers for Shedeur Sanders, the city practically combusted. It wasn't quiet anger, it wasn't mild concern, it was outrage, desperation, and collective heartbreak all flooding out, loud, raw, and unfiltered. Within hours, the internet was ablaze. Hashtags like Keep Shedeur and Pay Your King shot to the national trending list. A more cynical tag, Browns Panic, became the rallying cry for rival fans mocking Cleveland's dysfunction. Twitter feeds turned into a war zone. Some fans were begging the front office to pony up immediately, while others were posting compilation videos of the Browns' long line of failed quarterbacks, with captions like, "Here we go again." Outside team facilities, the reaction took on a life of its own. Local reporters snapped photos of fans showing up with handmade signs. "Don't let him walk," shouted one. Another read, "If he leaves, we leave." These weren't organized protests, not the kind orchestrated by fan unions or online forums. These were organic, spontaneous eruptions of emotion. You could feel the fear in the Sharpie ink. On local sports radio, the phone lines melted down. Longtime supporters called in nearly screaming, voices cracking as they accused ownership of negligence. "We've been through Couch, Quinn, Whedon, Manziel, Mayfield. Enough," one man vented. Another woman choked up through tears. "He's our hope. He's our future. Don't ruin this too." Some callers didn't even debate contract figures. They just yelled, "Sign him, pay him, whatever it takes." Online demographics told their own fascinating story. Younger fans, raised in a culture of highlight reels, jersey swats, and player empowerment, unanimously supported giving Shedeur whatever number he wanted. In their eyes, his star power alone justified the deal. Older fans, with more scars from decades of Cleveland letdowns, were more skeptical. They worried about destroying the salary cap or setting a dangerous precedent. Yet even they softened in one critical way. They all agreed losing Shedeur wasn't an option. Generational talent doesn't come around in Cleveland often, if ever. Messing it up again wasn't just failure, it was betrayal. And betrayal was the word hanging heavy. Because this wasn't just about one quarterback. To Cleveland fans, everything about Shedeur symbolized hope breaking through the curse. His name carried pedigree. His arrival brought instant excitement. His jersey sales ranked among the league's leaders. It wasn't just football, it was cultural, it was emotional, it was relief. Losing him before he even truly began wouldn't feel like the end of a rookie era. It would feel like the death of a redemption arc. National media poured gasoline on the flames. TV personalities ridiculed Cleveland almost gleefully. One panelist barked, "You finally get something right, and you're about to lose it anyway." Another sneered that Cleveland's saga was déjà vu for a fan base that should be numb to disappointment by now. Talk shows made montages of Browns quarterback heartbreak, slotting Shedeur rumors neatly into the sad tradition. Cleveland wasn't just fearing a loss. They were being publicly humiliated in front of millions of viewers. That humiliation added to the desperation. Social media videos of fans banging drums outside stadium fences circulated widely, racking up millions of views. Younger influencers stitched reaction memes onto them, dragging Cleveland while sympathizing with the city's pain. Even rivals joined the trend. Ravens fans mocking Cleveland with posts like, "Thanks for scouting him, we'll take it from here," and Saints fans sharing Photoshop billboards with Shedeur, wearing a gold jersey under the banner, "Our next king." Through it all, a single message kept cycling louder and louder. This cannot happen. The online fury hardened into a demand that Haslam and the organization act decisively. Not in a month, not after the offseason, not after leverage evaporated. Now. Fans overwhelmed comment sections, flooded Cleveland's official posts, and practically screamed into the void. If this team lets Shedeur Sanders walk, it's over. And in truth, it was about more than football. For the Cleveland community, blue-collar, long-suffering, endlessly loyal, Sanders wasn't just a quarterback. He was a mirror of their hope. For a city scarred by economic challenges, plagued by sports curses, and mocked endlessly by rivals, he symbolized pride, redemption. His exit, especially in such dramatic fashion, would only deepen the community's wounds. It would confirm their worst suspicion, that no matter how bright something begins in Cleveland, the ending is always the same. And that's why the fans weren't just upset. They weren't just disappointed. They were explosive. Because they've lived this nightmare before, and they refuse. Absolutely refuse to let it happen again. If the fan outrage was a tidal wave, the media reaction was a full-blown hurricane. It didn't take long before every sports network, podcast, and blog locked their sights on the Sanders contract crisis. Cleveland wasn't just trending locally. They were dominating the national conversation. And not in the way you want when you're trying to sell stability. The first blow landed from television. On FS1, Analysts pounced as though they'd been waiting for this segment their entire careers. One host leaned forward and declared, "The Cleveland Browns are about to make the most expensive mistake in football history." Over at ESPN, whole panels debated whether this was organizational malpractice, with Stephen A. Smith practically shouting through the screen, "Everybody knows this kid is special, and Cleveland's treating him like an afterthought. Now Baltimore knows it. New Orleans knows it. And guess what? The rest of the league is watching too." And that was the real dagger. Once the media framed the Browns not just as vulnerable, but incompetent, it validated everything Baltimore and New Orleans had dangled in their presentations to Sanders. In the NFL, perception matters as much as reality. And once the national conversation painted Cleveland as dysfunctional, momentum shifted toward the suitors. But media firestorms are only one piece. Behind the cameras, league executives and agents were watching with hawk-like precision. For the GMs, the message was clear. If this situation ends with Sanders signing a deal worth $275 million with record guarantees, the quarterback market will never be the same again. Rookie extensions, which used to be cautiously negotiated after 2 or 3 stable seasons, would now be benchmarked against Shedeur Sanders. As one anonymous exec told reporters, if a rookie with 1 season under his belt can leverage instability into $200 million guaranteed, imagine what the next superstar class is going to demand. Agents, meanwhile, were practically salivating. This wasn't just a contract war. It was leverage on display in its purest form. Sanders had flipped the NFL's unwritten rule that rookies earn patience before riches. By commanding record figures after glimpses of potential, he was creating a precedent that empowered younger stars everywhere. Agents were already drafting mental blueprints for how to mimic this tactic. Highlight organizational dysfunction, encourage leaks, amplify noise, and pressure franchises with fan outrage until the offers pour in. In other words, Shedeur's saga was becoming a playbook, not just a storyline. Even coaches across the league were quietly paying attention. The Browns' unraveling revealed the high stakes of locker room management and communication. If veteran players in Cleveland were whispering concerns and younger players were watching for their own cues, then every head coach knew this could happen to them too. Keep your quarterback happy had always been coaching 101. Now it looked more like survival strategy. Then came the league officials. Talk behind the curtain suggested unease about how brazen Baltimore and New Orleans had been with their approaches. Tampering rules technically exist, but enforcement has always been murky, full of loopholes that savvy franchises dance through. Sanders' situation was exposing that murk in front of the whole world. Could powerful big-market teams routinely swoop in on unstable franchises to poach potential icons? Would small-market clubs even stand a chance at developing their stars long-term? For a league built on a mythology of competitive parity, this was a threat far bigger than one rookie's checkbook. And if you think rival franchises weren't sniffing around, think again. Sources claimed multiple GMs from quarterback-hungry markets like Atlanta and Denver were closely monitoring, prepared to pounce if Cleveland cracked under the pressure. Once the media circus showed Cleveland on its heels, it wasn't just Ravens and Saints circling. A half-dozen front offices were scribbling hypothetical trade packages, waiting to see if the Browns' desperation tipped the scales. In short, the Sanders sweepstakes had blown past Cleveland. It became the NFL story, shaping boardroom strategies, contract models, and coaching philosophies across the entire league. Media personalities milked it for headlines, executives dissected it for lessons, and agents sharpened it into leverage. And that's the cruel twist for Cleveland. The longer this saga drags out, the less it feels like their private headache, and the more it feels like public theater at their expense. Because while the Browns struggled to show they were in control, every other corner of the NFL was using their panic as a free masterclass in how to gain leverage, seize opportunities, and expose rivals. When you strip away the noise, it all comes down to a set of forks in the road. Each direction Shedeur Sanders could take doesn't just change his future, it rewrites pieces of NFL history. The what-if game isn't just speculation anymore, it's the tightrope Cleveland walks with every passing hour of hesitation. Let's map them out. What if Cleveland caves in matches? This is the version the Browns desperately want, and the one fans demand most. It would mean Haslam throws aside caution, the front office reworks the entire salary cap, and Sanders receives a contract that rivals Baltimore's and New Orleans' combined boldness. In this scenario, Shedeur not only stays, he stays as the man. He's handed the offense outright, guaranteed starter status. No more coy talk about competition or development timelines. Cleveland finally shakes the quarterback graveyard label and keeps a generational talent in their building. But here's the catch. To pay Sanders at that level, Cleveland would likely gut other parts of the roster. Offensive line stalwarts, defensive playmakers, and key offensive weapons might be sacrificed to balance the books. So, while the fan base celebrates victory, the Browns could find themselves tied to one shining star, but with cracks forming everywhere else. Could Sanders carry a top-heavy franchise on his shoulders in the brutal AFC North? That's the gamble. What if he takes Baltimore's offer? This is the nightmare for Cleveland, but a dream for football junkies who crave innovation. The Ravens' 2 QB revolution would be unleashed in full. Lamar Jackson and Shedeur Sanders sharing the backfield, splitting defenses into chaos, becoming the NFL's most feared offensive weapon. It wouldn't just win games, it would rewrite playbooks across the league. Suddenly, defenses would need to account for two playmaking quarterbacks at once. From Sanders' perspective, it would be almost perfect. He'd grow alongside an MVP mentor in a winning culture, with none of the instability that clouded Cleveland. Championships would be within reach immediately, and he'd be part of a tactical revolution that could define his legacy. The downside? Sharing the limelight in Lamar's orbit means he wouldn't instantly be the solo face of the franchise. But championships outweigh egos, and Baltimore made sure to highlight that message in bold letters. What if he crowns himself in New Orleans? This outcome has a different flavor. Less revolution, more resurrection. Sanders would walk into the Superdome not as a student or junior partner, but as a king. No competition, no shadow, just a throne. Drew Brees left empty, and a fan base starved for a new savior. The Saints' offer placed Shedeur at the center of their culture, their marketing, their identity. In New Orleans, he wouldn't just be playing football. He'd be inheriting a legacy. The upside is obvious. Immediate starter, maximum guaranteed money, a city that wraps him in unconditional love. The risk? The Saints are talented, but their roster is aging. Their competitive window isn't as wide as Baltimore's. Sanders could win big early on, or find himself carrying too much weight if the roster declines. Still, for a player chasing both impact and identity, New Orleans writes the most emotionally compelling script. What if Cleveland stalls too long? This fourth path is quieter but deadly. Instead of acting decisively, Cleveland drags out the negotiations, tweaking offers, holding more crisis meetings. In this limbo, Sanders grows more frustrated, fans grow angrier, and rival suitors smell blood. By the time Cleveland finally makes a serious proposal, the leverage has already slipped away. This version doesn't end with bold announcements, but with a slow leak of confidence. Sanders demanding a trade down the line. The Browns once again left with regret as history repeats itself. And what if Sanders shocks everyone? There's always the wild card, the possibility that Shedeur flips the script entirely, pulls a move no one expects, Maybe he uses the leverage from both super teams to extract sweeping organizational changes in Cleveland. New coaching philosophies, modernized systems, even a power seat at the decision-making table. In that scenario, his contract becomes more than money. It becomes a blueprint for player empowerment. A moment where a rookie quarterback reshapes an entire franchise's DNA. Each path feels believable. Each one comes with its own thrills, risks, and historical weight. But the cruelest reality? Every passing day makes it harder for Cleveland to control the outcome. The Ravens and Saints have already shown their hands. Bold, unprecedented, and alluring. Cleveland hasn't. And if you're Sanders, why cling to the chaos when two doors wide open promise either revolution or royalty? That's why this saga isn't just about contracts. It's about crossroads. And sooner or later, Sanders has to choose which road defines not only his career, but the future of the franchise he either leads or leaves behind. Here we are, back at the center of the storm, watching a drama that feels less like football and more like a Shakespearean play with shoulder pads. Shedeur Sanders, the heir to football royalty, stands on the brink of a decision that doesn't just shape his career, but shakes the very pillars of the NFL itself. And for Cleveland, the cruel irony is clear. The moment they thought they had solved a decades-long quarterback curse is the same moment their house of cards started trembling. This isn't just about a pile of guaranteed millions. Yes, the Ravens threw $275 million onto the table with performance bonuses that stretch toward $325 million. Yes, the Saints raised the stakes to $200 million guaranteed and dangled a clear starting throne in front of them. But those numbers, as insane as they are, only represent the surface. Beneath them lies something far bigger: respect, power, and faith. The things Cleveland still struggles to show consistently. For the Ravens, Sanders represents innovation. They're selling him the future. Not just money, not just wins, but a place in football history as one half of an unprecedented two-quarterback revolution. Partnered with Lamar Jackson, he'd get instant mentorship, immediate contention, and the chance to terrify defenses in ways we've never seen before. That's one path. For the Saints, Sanders represents salvation. They're offering him identity, culture, and legacy, wrapping him in the embrace of a city that still aches for its next breeze. New Orleans pitched him as more than just quarterback. They pitched him as a hero, the man to restore pride and passion to a football-mad community. The moment he puts on the gold and black, he's not a project, he's the king. That's another path. And then there's Cleveland, caught frantically piecing together a counter storyline while the rest of the league laughs and critiques. Their answer came late, in chaos, in improvisation. Upgraded practice reps, sudden apologies, emergency blank checks, all scramble, little confidence. Instead of controlling the narrative, they confirmed it, that their organization only acts bold when cornered. That their history of quarterback collapses isn't an accident, but a habit. And now, once again, the fate of the franchise rests on one last, desperate gamble. For fans, this pain cuts deeper than negotiation drama. Sanders isn't just another player. He's the projection of redemption, a symbol that maybe finally the Browns drafted someone who could flip the script. That's why hashtags like #KeepShedeur popped up overnight. That's why protests formed outside the facility. That's why angry callers flooded radio stations with voices cracking between love and rage. Because if Sanders walks, it's not just about losing a star. It's about confirming every fear that Cleveland cannot, under any circumstances, hold on to greatness. Meanwhile, the ripple effects have already gone national. Agents are studying Sanders' leverage like an instruction manual, figuring out how to weaponize instability for their clients in the future. Front offices are realizing that rookie extensions are no longer calm, predictable processes. They're now auctions fueled by branding and media storms. Even league officials are whispering about tampering rules, wondering if the NFL's idea of competitive balance can withstand billion-dollar suitors picking off unstable franchises at will. So here's the bottom line. This isn't just Cleveland's crossroads. This is the NFL's. If Sanders stays in Cleveland, it will be framed as a miracle hold. The day the Browns finally fought back and won against the ghosts haunting them. If he leaves, especially for a rival like Baltimore or a culture-thirsty fan base like New Orleans, it signals something bigger. That no amount of draft picks or slogans can shield a fractured organization from losing everything the second a stronger rival circles. And for Sanders himself, the choice is even sharper. He can stay and try to forge his own miracle in Cleveland, battling uphill against a history of failure. Or he can walk through one of the two golden doors waiting for him, one marked innovation, the other marked immortality. Either way, his decision will be remembered not just as a personal milestone, but as the inflection point where the balance of power in professional football shifted. So as Cleveland holds its breath, Baltimore sharpens its chessboard, and New Orleans readies its the bone, we're left with the television script question hanging in the air. Which story will Sanders choose to write? Because when the dust settles, only one truth remains certain. This isn't just about contracts or cap space. It's about legacy, and legacies aren't built quietly. They're carved into history with choices like this, choices that define eras, cities, and the future of the game itself.